webinar series. This is the 261st webinar, 261st webinar which we are doing. We have been very, very fortunate and privileged. We have had Nobel laureates come and speak on this webinar series. And in the month of March, 7th and 14th of March, both Fridays, we have again two Nobel laureates coming and speaking under this webinar series. This webinar series, as the think tank Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare stands, works on contemporary economic issues. The aim of the think tank is research-based policy advice. And as COVID hit us, we were very worried onto the research activities and advisory role. So we started this webinar series. We have been also very lucky that as per our original objective of getting the best minds from across the world, both Indians working abroad and Indians working in India, as well as on contemporary global issues, people working abroad, we wanted to have a blend of them. We have been very fortunate. We have had the best of minds from across the world, from across different universities, Europe, America, England, Australia. We have had speakers, apart from those from within our own country. In India, we had, I would say, a very important event, the G20, which we were the president. Under that G20 series, EGROW was very fortunate. While many activities were being done and I was part of some of them, but then we were fortunate that from EGROW, Mr. Deepak, Dr. Deepak Mishra and Professor Ashima Goel from IGIDR helped us host 11 lectures, webinars on new international economic order. So in that sense, in our humble way, we made a contribution there. The G20 series and the whole event was extremely important for our country and country's international image. We were also able to contribute 6 webinars on climate and 6 on women empowerment. G20 brought us, in a way, into the limelight globally. And recently, we noticed that the Sherpa there, Mr. Amitabh Kant, has come out with an excellent book. So we requested him to please come and share his research and findings, and we liked it. I knew what a Sherpa is, but I did not know it could be termed as Mountain G20. And I thought that was a great coinage of the term, and that in a way is true too. To discuss about G20 and its role and the way it was done, and it was not simple. A year before, we knew the type of discord that happened, and a year after, we are aware. To get that event done and get the communique done, and I was at the IMF for a couple of years, so I know how difficult it is to get a communique done, was a Herculean task. So we requested Mr. N.K Singh to kindly chair the session, and Mr. Deepak Mishra, who was part of the G20 educational series, to be the discussant. Let me briefly introduce you the speakers of the day before I hand it over to Mr. N.K Singh to carry the proceedings further. Actually, all the 3 speakers are very well known. But briefly, I'd like to mention that many of us economists feel so privileged and honored to listen to Mr. N.K Singh. He is a prominent economist, academician, policymaker. He's been a very senior bureaucrat and a civil servant. And for anybody, the type of assignments that he has done in the Ministry of Finance, the expenditure secretary, and other assignments are in a way dream for an economist, and I'm sure for a bureaucrat. He is the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission. He also was the chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Review Committee. And sir, I was part of it when it was being minted in the Reserve Bank of India under the governorship of Bimal Jalan. That side I was drafting it, and I know how difficult that task was and the way you reviewed it and revised it. He has also been a member of the upper house of the Parliament Rajya Sabha from 2008 to 2014, during which time he contributed to several prominent parliamentary standing committees, including the Public Accounts Committee, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and the Committee on Human Resource Development. Our speaker for the day is Mr. Amitabh Kant, another illustrious public policy expert in our country. He is India's G20 shaper and former Chief Executive Officer of the Niti Aayog. He is also the former Secretary of Department for Industrial Policy and Promotion, Government of India. He is member of the Indian Administrative Service Kerala cadre. He has been the chairman and CEO of Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor Development Corporation and chairman of the National Productivity Council. He is most well known for his work on branding India, an incredible story. He's been a key driver of Make in India, and Make in India is about 10 years old now. Startup India, Incredible India, and God's Own Country. The type of initiatives that he takes, positions, and brands India, and Kerala especially, when it came to God's Own Country. And sir, I used to study in Trivandrum, CDS, and therefore I know what your branding did, how correct it was. Our discussant for the day is Mr. Dr. Deepak Mishra. He is the Director and Chief Executive of the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, EGROW as we call it. Before joining EGROW, he was the practice manager at the World Bank's Macroeconomic Trade and Investment Global Practice. He was also the co-director of the World Development Report. He was the country representative representing World Bank in India. And before the World Bank, he was with Tata Motors. With this, I hand over the session to Mr. N.K Singh now to carry the proceedings further. Sir, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Charan, for this opportunity to speak and to preside over the discussion on Amitabh's this remarkable book. I have already summed up the book since I was privileged to write endorsement for this book, which has been printed, no doubt. This book is a chronography of, as the title rightly suggests, how India scaled the G20, the MT of G20, the inside story, the drama of the negotiations, and the ability in that of India coming out as a remarkable act in the evolving story of the G20. I've always said that the G20 is like a rolling stone and rarely gathers moss. But if it gathered moss, which the world acclaimed at that time, it was a very unusual G20 because people remember the New Delhi Declaration, but what it achieved as compared to what it had inherited from Indonesia, where a consensus was not reached, and the evolving story thereafter. The ability for India to not only be able to forge a global consensus, where contradictions were very apparent and asymmetry was the order of the day, or a remarkable set of issues, is the drama narrated beautifully in this exceedingly important work. The G20, of course, as the book has explained, in its own evolution has taken various phases from being not only just an important platform, but its evolution from becoming a platform to becoming a shaper of subsequent policies and to forge chart out the global roadmap in terms of economics, in terms of politics, looking at the challenges ahead. This book is a remarkable story. The India's global leadership, which is the first chapter, highlights really the difficult role of India being able to forge this kind of a consensus. The portion on multilateral development banks is another remarkable story, as also the chapter on digital transformation and financial inclusion. It highlights the importance of geopolitics and the global cooperation, brings out the policy implications in the whole G20 story. The most remarkable feature of this book is the exceptional role played by Sharpa, who has, as you have defined, but he has reshaped what Sharpa's role can be, from becoming merely a facilitator to becoming an actor, and to be able to win the trust and cooperation of countries who are diametrically opposed to each other on issues of ideology, on issues of economic policy, and the issues of the social challenges which they seek to address. So, in this sense, nobody else could have been better placed to write a book of this quality than Amitabh has done in this book, which I'm reading, and I have read large chapters of it with a great degree of interest. So, as Amitabh himself will recognize, that time is not static, and even from the time when he wrote this book, the book came in public domain, there are events which are taking place all over, which need to be considered and analyzed in the entirety of events, in the dynamics of time, how he sees not only how he addressed these challenges in a period when the G20 globally was under India's chairmanship had this wide degree of recognition, but what he sees are the evolving challenges. What is the role which G20 will continue to play? We are coming to the end almost in the next 6 months or so. South Africa will pass on the baton to the next G20 presidency, which is the United States. And how does he really, therefore, see the future of G20 in a world which is fraught with increasing uncertainties and growing apprehensions on whether collective cohesive action of a group of countries, which technically is now G21, because during Amitabh's period, India achieved that remarkable ability of adding Africa as an important critical component of the G20. So the past is as important as the present, and the future increasingly so. These are the sort of issues on which I'm sure that Amitabh will bring to bear his remarkable understanding of the complexities of the issues and the complexities of the time when far-reaching developments in terms of the power of technology, particularly artificial intelligence in its multiple forms, can unleash productive forces even while not threatening become and to overcome, as the Prime Minister very right out just 2 days ago in Paris, while going there to be the co-chair of the AI summit, that how does it harness this technology for bringing about greater cohesiveness within the G20? Privileged to have said these few introductory words. And now, since time is running out, can I request Sri Amitabh Kant, the author of this book, to make his comments, after which I'll request Deepak Mishra to make his observations. Amitabh, over to you.
First of all, I'm extremely thankful to Mr. Charan Singh for hosting this event. And I'm particularly delighted that my guru and my very distinguished senior, Mr. N.K. Singh, is chairing this session. He's probably the most distinguished civil servant India has ever had, and a civil servant with such intellectual vigor and depth. And it's really an honor for me. But more than that, I think Mr. N.K. Singh himself has left a huge imprint on India's G20 presidency by chairing the report of N.K. Singh and Larry Summers on the transformation of the multilateral institution, which led to our spelling out very clearly that there should be bigger, bolder, and more effective multilateral financial institutions. And clearly, his role in clearly defining the quantum of resources required of $3 trillion per year, with about 1.8 trillion for climate and 1.2 trillion for SDGs. And to that extent, he has done a great human service for the global south. He's raised a number of issues, and I would, instead of looking at the past, I would like to look at the future. But there were just three critical issues I would like to point out about India's G20 presidency. One, that India did this presidency very differently from other G20 countries. When they hosted it in one or two states or cities, or their capital. But in India's case, the Prime Minister desired that it should be held across all states and union territories of India. So we had 230 meetings in over 60 cities of India. And therefore, it's a great example of cooperative federalism, because we use this opportunity for the states to drive their culture, their soft power, their cuisine, promote their one district, one product, and it's probably the best example of cooperative federalism. Secondly, as Mr. N.K. Singh pointed out, we started with G20, but we made it very inclusive by making it G21 and making African Union an integral part of G20. And therefore, from about 72% of the global population, we took it to about 86% of the global population, and almost about 80% of the global GDP is now accounted for by the G20. So that's a very significant contribution of India. And thirdly, to my mind, that demonstrated India's being a very big contributor towards the global South solidarity. And therefore, that is one India's very big contribution. The third point is that India was confronted by a series of challenges when we took it over, in terms of just 12 of the SDGs being on track, the huge crisis of climate action, the huge crisis of Russia-Ukraine war, slowdown of economic growth, etc. But India remained very action-oriented, very decisive, and very inclusive all through its G20, and that is reflected in the fact that we had 88 paras, all consensus, over 112 outcomes, as compared to the previous G20s when there were just about 40-odd outcomes. So we pushed for a lot of transformation, and some of the key transformations were, the fact that the world accepted digital public infrastructure and laid out the definition and the framework for it, and also the fact that the reforms of the multilateral financial institutions was critical, which was defined by the N.K. Singh, Larry Summers report. And thirdly, I think we brought center stage women-led development, which had never been done before. So those were very formidable contributions of India. But I want to move forward from where the book leaves off and look at the future, and that's what the chairman, Mr. N.K. Singh, highlighted, that time doesn't stand still. There's plenty of action across the world. Multilateralism itself is under challenge, and to my mind, there are three critical issues which are very, very important for the world. One is that big power conflict remains center stage. We have a war going on in between Russia and Ukraine in the heart of Europe for the last 3.5 years. And that there were about 100,000 people have died there. Over about 350,000 people died in the Middle East crisis. While we've had ceasefire in Middle East, this war continues unabated. And the First World War was fought in Europe. The Second World War was fought in Europe. And the present crisis of Russia-Ukraine has severely impacted food, fuel, and fertilizer. So that's one big crisis. The second is a complete breakdown of global supply chains. And you've had a scenario where Biden had imposed 100% duty on Chinese automobiles, 50% on batteries, 25% on steel and aluminum. And then Europe imposed 45% duty on China. And they did this because they said that the Chinese state is supporting manufacturing. It's not market-led production, but it's backed by the state government, and they are over-flooding the global markets, not based on demand supply, and therefore China needs to be, this oversupply needs to be handled for the world global economy. And, now you have Trump coming in, and he's put 25% duty on Mexico, 25% on Canada, a 10% additional duty on China, and again, 25% on steel and aluminum. And he says, I'm also going to put reciprocal tariffs. And that means there's a complete breakdown of global supply chain. Now, I believe that global trade has lifted vast segments of population in the world above poverty line in the last few decades. And this breakdown will have a severe impact in terms of both global prosperity, in terms of impact, in terms of ensuring that sustainable development goals are met, in terms of strong, sustainable, balanced growth across the world. And it will hit consumers also in different continents, including America. So what are the implications of that? We need to discuss and debate today. And the third is, rightly, as Mr. N.K. Singh pointed out, we have the emergence of new productive forces. You have the emergence of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. And these are very, very powerful forces. They have the power to unleash production, productivity, improve human lives, enhance learning outcomes, health outcomes, and they are very, very powerful forces. We've seen a huge amount of investments in artificial intelligence. Just about a fortnight back, you had the Stargate initiative, a $500 billion initiative from America, which was countered by DeepSeek. And DeepSeek said that we've done it at very minimal cost with just 200 engineers. That demonstrated that, and that was despite the constraints of putting controls on computing power for China. So the Americans have said that we will not provide NVIDIA 100 and NVIDIA H100s, and we will not provide the latest Blackwell GPUs to China. But despite that, what Chinese demonstrated that you can do very clever engineering by great soft power and great, limited computing power, but great soft power, convergence of this, and you could actually beat the Americans at that game. But they did it through open source. And what it demonstrates is the great ability of open source to lead the way. And if India has earlier used open source, open API, globally interoperable models in its digital public infrastructure to drive financial inclusion, to drive fast payment, to drive credit, to drive insurance, many other areas. And therefore, my personal view is that the AI race is wide open, it's just begun, and rarely has in the technology race the initial disruptor won the race. It's the second mover advantage which will be critical, and India must take second mover advantage in this and really disrupt the world with at low cost, low energy consuming, and more competitive AI for the rest of the world. So these, to my mind, are critical forces. This is critical. We've just had the Prime Minister of India having a very effective meeting with the President of the United States of America, where we've discussed many things, including the artificial intelligence. And it'll be necessary for India to combine the power of computing with its strength in software power and to really use that, because India has over about 500,000 engineers. India has over great amount of engineering institutes where curriculum needs to be re-altered for the world of tomorrow. And India can easily emerge as a great champion of artificial intelligence and quantum computing as it provides more and more great computing power through the AI mission to engineering institutions and to the researchers. This, to my mind, will be a great step forward. So these, to my mind, are three critical challenges which the world faces. The race is wide open. And I personally feel that we are moving towards a settlement in the dispute of Russia and Ukraine, because the Russia-Ukraine war was fully being supported and financed by the United States of America, backed by Europe. And once Trump says that we are going to sort this war out, we are going to move towards peace, he has an interaction with Putin. I think in the next 2 to 3 months, you'll get a settlement on the Russia-Ukraine war. The challenge will be about global supply chain, because there it's important if India has to move towards Viksit Bharat. The challenge for India is to move from close to 4 trillion to a $30 trillion economy. And that means that your GDP has to grow 9x, your per capita income has to grow 8x, but your manufacturing has to grow 16x. And that manufacturing growing at 16x cannot happen without exports. Every time India has grown, it has grown on the back of exports. And therefore, India needs to become an exporting nation. And that cannot happen without penetrating the US market. And therefore, to my mind, it's very important that India works in partnership with the United States to penetrate the US, and this target of 500 billion of trade, which has been set today, is very critical for India to achieve. And I'll be very happy to respond to many of these queries which may arise. The last point I want to make is about the future of multilateralism itself, which is very critical. Now, the United Nations has been dysfunctional. The Security Council has been totally non-functional because one of the Security Council members has been at war itself, and that's why G20 virtually became the place where consensus could be arrived at, including the para on Russia, Ukraine, which after India's G20, that became the accepted para for all multilateral forums. That took us about 300 hours of negotiation and 250 bilaterals and 16 paras that failed, but that became the template for all multilaterals. And to my mind, it'll be very critical for India to take leadership of G2 of the Global South, because India could succeed in Delhi because India worked in partnership with the Global South. India became the voice of the Global South. India worked with Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia. And I've seen when Global South works together, it is able to push for consensus on a range of issues, and that will become very critical in the days to come. The challenge is that when South Africa is holding its presidency right now, the United States Secretary of State Rubio has refused to participate in the foreign affairs meeting, saying that South Africa is bad. And South Africa is bad because they filed a case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, which United States has walked out of. So these are the challenges of multilateralism right now. But to my mind, the only forum which can be functional, the only forum which can drive global consensus on a range of issues, and the only forum where you have China, Russia, G7, and the Global South represented, including Turkey and Saudi, is the G20. There's no other forum. And there is only one flexible body in the world where leaders can meet together and informally discuss, debate, and interact. And their body language is very important, and they can interact informally, still remains only the G20. The last time Trump was the president of the United States, even when he had walked out of climate, he remained a very integral part of G20. And with that, the G20 had moved forward on a range of issues. So, to my mind, G20 will remain a very powerful, a very critical, and a very significant body, and probably the only multilateral forum where you would still be able to arrive at a consensus on a range of issues. And that is my perspective on these issues. And I now look forward to hearing from other participants. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Amitabh. In all fairness to you, we have addressed the past, but more importantly, you have addressed the future. And I think that you have mentioned about the body language. I have no doubt in admitting that your body language remains as futuristic and as optimistic, which the Sherpa of the G20 is, is necessary as we chart out in more complex areas. The South African, whatever be the issues, which did not enable either the U.S. Representative to be present for the foreign ministers meeting. I believe that perhaps even on the finance track, there would be issues which would be complex. And the interesting point which you said was towards the end that considering that the next presidency of the G20 is with the United States, the constructive role played by President Trump on the last occasion when he was the president, and that augurs well for the G20 as we go forward. You have raised some very, very important issues, which I'm sure that Deepak will want to address those. The 4 or 5 important issues which you mentioned are not only central for global prosperity, but of course very central to the future of India as it seeks to become a more developed economy. So with these little comments, I move on to Dr. Deepak Mishra, who, if I may say so, has been rightly pointed out by Charan, played a very important role in the G20 in multiple ways. He was a great value and support to the work of the Summers and my report on the multilateral development banks, but his engagement goes beyond merely the issues of reforming the global financial architecture. So would you like Deepak to come in and to give us of your comments? Deepak.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you, Charan, and thank you, Mr. Kant. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, so this is a wonderful opportunity. I can't help but say that, with the founder member of EGROW, the current board member of EGROW, and the director here, this event should have been actually holding in EGROW. But I'm delighted that Charan decided to have this and invite all of us to be part of this group. The downside of that is you're not going to get very different views because I think we all drink from the same glass of water. But let me try to say 2 things. So firstly, let me begin by saying this is a book I feel is a remarkable story about a remarkable country coming from a remarkable person. So I would certainly urge everybody to read this book. And there are 2 broad reasons why we should do that. So I'm going to start by why should we read this book? Kind of a bit of a backdrop to the G20 and things obviously that are related but different from the way I was looking at G20 as an outsider, not as insider as Mr. Kant. And second is what does this book and this event means for kind of broader Indian society, especially for think tanks and some of the audience who are here from that community. So this is the G20 is compared with the Mount Everest, and in many ways it was actually, I feel there are multiple hurdles that Mr. Kant and the senior policymakers in India had to go through. That was because of 3 things. One was that G20 had actually become a fairly moribund institutions before it came to India. In the sense, after the global financial crisis in 2008-9, there was a lot of excitement, enthusiasm around G20, But as it went through several more iterations, you could see the enthusiasm declining. In fact, I remember in EGROW, we used to do an annual international conference on G20. In 2021, when I called up some of the people to invite them to come, they used a word saying G20 is one of the most underwhelming organization that's around. Why should you come and speak at a conference like this? So that's a huge challenge, that if you are starting with this kind of reputation to come. The second was that obviously, as Mr. Kant mentioned, there's unprecedented convergence of crisis. So food crisis, post-pandemic issues, the two wars going on, the climate breakdown, so multiple issues that was confronting India when India took over the presidency. And finally, to make the matter even harder, I think the Prime Minister set really ambitious goal for the team to achieve. So not only want to democratize G20, and we called it a people G20, we wanted to decentralize it and take it to every states and cities and towns in the country. And we also wanted to be very inclusive. There's 6 different priorities. So all of this made it an extremely complicated task to maneuver and succeed. And we all know what happened, but obviously, some of us are biased being part of this process. So when it comes to outcome, I remember in October 2013, just about a month after the G20 was over, so we had the independent expert group here in Delhi discussing about the last iteration of the report that they're doing. So Professor Larry Summers, Lord Nick Stern, and a lot of the members, including Mr. Singh, and we are all there. And so I asked Larry Summers, who never minces words, and he means what he says, saying, what did you think about G20, watching it from outside, sitting in US and watching the G20 summit and the New Delhi declaration? What was your view? And this is what Larry said. He said, we are just blown away about what we saw. We felt, and he said, I feel India G20 event was like the Beijing 2008 Summer Olympics. This was India's coming out party. Lots of people around the world are forming their opinion about India, and this was the best way that India could showcase itself to the rest of the world. Now that I'm part of the South Africa G20 activities in T20 and all, what I hear constantly from my Brazilian and South African colleagues is the apology that they cannot match the grand design, the careful planning, the flawless execution, and the tangible results that India G20 achieved. So these are fantastic achievements that happened over this last long period, and that's why this book is a important way for you to get into it, to understand what really happened, how this happened, and how we could actually manage to achieve so much with so little. So in a sense, that's kind of my motivation for reading this book, and I really think everybody should take a look at it. In terms of what it actually means for India, for think tank community, and for so to give you, while Mr. Kant talks about climbing the Mount Everest, I felt like many of us in a small ways had to mount or climb our own hurdles or overcome our own hurdles. Many of us went to the top of the mountain and saw what would India look like if we can maintain the same achievement that we did in G20. Specifically for EGROW, we were really privileged to be part of the Singh Summer Independent Expert Group, and we were the secretariat to it, and we were the policy advisors. And it was a wonderful experience for think tank like EGROW to get that exposure to work with CGD, with Brookings, with London School of Economics, and with a whole host of policymakers around the world. And so, in a sense, as we are globalizing India, even a small think tank like EGROW could immensely benefit, including our young researchers, to see how global diplomacy happens. Not only we are part of the finance track on multilateral development banks agenda, we are also part of the working group on trade and investment and digital economy, global partnership with finance and inclusion, and also on climate change. And in each of those cases, many of our researchers were part of the India team. So they were sitting together with the government and preparing the notes, helping prepare the minutes, and even sometimes writing and drafting the communique. So these are the exposures that obviously were of immense help and excitement to researchers in a career, and those exposures would have been possible without the India hosting a successful G20 event. Post G20, there's what did we really achieve? I mean, we did wonderful things, but has there been any tangible, long-lasting, enduring impact of G20? And I must tell you, just with one example. So we are working with Gates Foundation to globalize the concept of digital public infrastructure, which is one of the most successful outcomes of the G20 India's event. So we have a community of practice on digital public infrastructure that is joined by 25 different organizations around the world, from Princeton University to Tufts to Brookings and a bunch of Canadian organizations, UK, Paris School of Economics, London School of Economics, Brazil, and in EGROW, we are actually hosting this community of practice globally on DPI, and that won't have been possible without this India successful campaign during the G20 process. So there are really tangible benefits that many of us have got out of this process. So let me just begin by saying that, end by saying that when historians will look back to trace the rise of India as a global economic power, their roots, their such process will take them to at least, how India's G20 summit was held. It was an important milestone in India's historical context, and as India's Sherpa, Mr. Kant will remain part of India's economic history when someone writes it. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
We could open up to questions, and to begin with, I'm sure Dr. Ashok Vishandas would have one. I also would like to have a question, if you permit me, sir.
Please go ahead.
I must thank you, Mr. Amitabh Kant, and the Prime Minister. The idea of doing it and hosting it in different cities, I thought was the most fantastic idea. While we were able to showcase, and I was part of some of the events that took place in Bhopal, so while we were able to showcase to the rest of the world, while we were learning ourselves, the world also benefited from that cultural exchange, which I'm told the Prime Minister wanted. Wherever an event is done, there should be a cultural exchange of the local history and also the local cultural festival. And I thought that was fascinating. And when I was there in Bhopal and I witnessed it, and the keen interest that the foreigners had in it, with the local production, local culture on display, I thought we achieved a great success in showcasing India. So I think the credit does go to you, to the team which organized and thought through the G20. Sir, I had one question, and it comes from your observations as well as what I saw in the deliberations of the G20. Somehow, China seems to have made a very big headway starting from 1978 and galloping ahead of India. And therefore, they have come in the center stage of multilateral and global positioning. To that extent, India, for various reasons, some legitimate and some for others, India could not attain that economic power that rapidly, quote unquote, that stealthily, which China did. But I think this G20, which we organized, helped us recover a vast amount of lost ground. Would you agree with that, sir?
Professor Charan, my view on that is that, India did the G20 well, and we achieved a lot of success in terms of the content, in terms of being ambitious, inclusive. But I would say that, and we faced very formidable challenges from China actually during G20. They were not willing to accept Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. They were not willing to accept life, which, was the Prime Minister himself was driving, and they were not willing to accept women-led development. and consensus was eluding it, and geopolitical consensus was failing us in every single ministerial. All ministerials had failed till the final round. And then we worked together with the Chinese Sherpa, and I must say that at a personal level, I was able to build up a very good equation with the Chinese Sherpa, and we were able to get them around to agree to everything that they were objecting to throughout the whole year. But to your larger question, I think the only substitute to long-term, standing of India is that India needs to grow rapidly. India needs to grow at rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, for 3 decades or more. There are very few countries who've done this. Japan did this post-World War II, Korea did it, and in recent times, China has had this long spurt of growth for over 3 decades. And, the Prime Minister set a clear goal of Viksit Bharat. So my view is that there is no substitute but for India to become a very cost competitive, very efficient nation, to be able to grow at those rapid rates. Only when you become a $30 trillion economy, political power is very intricately linked with economic power, and that, to my mind, is critical. And the second point is that it's very important for India to work, in the next, as IMF rightly says, that 3/4 of the growth is going to come from the global south this year, and that will be the case in the next 3 decades. Simply because the demographics are in favor of Asia and Africa. And the population across America, across Europe, is all aging. It's aging in Japan as well. So the growth is going to come from these countries in the years to come. And it's very important for India to continuously carry out reforms, to continuously work in partnership with the global south, and to continue to grow and advance in the years to come. It's not an easy task, but it's important for India if it wants to be a global player in the years to come.
Thank you. Our next question. There was one other questioner. Sharon?
Yes, sir. Dr. Vishendas, would you like to? Otherwise, in the chat box, there is a question.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a very fascinating discussion, and we became richer by the intervention of Amitabh, Kant, Deepak, and then, of course, Shri N.K Singh. My very simple question: in our country, we are aspiring, because economic strength is the currency of power. We have seen how China has behaved, how USA has behaved, but India's, though it's a 5th largest economy in the globe, but per capita income is low. And is it not, you see that per capita income is so low that our population is such a big that it gives a very, to me, if I can use that, because average it's very, very, very low. And how we see, given that about 10 crore people in our country are registered with MG Narega, willing to work for 300 or less per day, such a big number. And then how we aspire to be economic power in the globe, and that is one. And how we become inclusive, where 80 crore people are getting free food, all those. So how do you see India will emerge as Viksit Bharat?
Okay, one last question, and then I'll request Amitabh to respond.
Can I ask a question, Ashima?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So
Ashima.
it was great, and congratulations on the book. It was really a huge achievement for India. And, what underlined this was a recent trip to Hampi. And I didn't know about the outstanding history, the Vijayanagar Empire, geography. And actually, it was a foreign friend of ours who recommended going there. And a driver there was saying that a lot of foreigners are coming here after the G20 was held there. So, this is an example of the long-term impact of the thinking and the kind of organization that G20 had. So taking that forward, we expected a certain long-term impact from 4 continuous emerging markets to take up issues that are relevant for emerging markets. 4 emerging markets chairing, and South Africa is the last, and then it goes to the US. So have we been able to build up a core group that will push certain issues? And for example, this that are relevant to us. and this issue of financing green growth in emerging markets or reforming multilateral institutions. We are seeing that Trump is cutting global aid drastically. And I was just reading that many of these institutions now are talking about bringing in private finance. This was one of the things, Dr. N.K Singh, also your committee had recommended, that the private finance is much more than what advanced countries have been able to give. So ways to get it up and running. And again, we have conditions where it needs to be set up and start running. And do you, Amitabh, do you think that there is some things we have done which will outlast the presidency of the emerging markets and keep this going?
Thank you. I think that
Thank you.
looking at the time, Amitabh, would you like to briefly respond to this set of questions?
I'll be extremely brief. I realize how precious time is, and to the first question, let me just say that India is right now actually, to my mind, growing on just 50% of its population. If 46% of your population is in agriculture, you need to, and these are wage earners. Post-COVID, the number of people dependent on agriculture has gone up. So you need to urbanize, you need to push for greater manufacturing, you need to become more cost competitive, and you need a growth with equity in a very big way. And that means you need states of Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, etc., all to urbanize and to manufacture. That's very critical for per capita GDP to rise, because these are the most populous states of India. I see a lot of progress on some of these fronts being made in Uttar Pradesh, which is a very populous state of India. But this, to my mind, is critical. You need to manufacture, you need to urbanize, you need exports to grow, and you need, of course, improvement in learning outcomes, health outcomes, so that your physical quality of life improves radically for India's per capita income to go up. This is very, very critical. And to the second point of Ashima Goel, let me just say that there have been very significant, long-lasting achievements. Firstly, because the technological revolution in the last 3 decades was carried out by the big tech in America and by Tencent and Alibaba in China. What India had done was to create an open source, open API model by which we had driven fast payments, credit, insurance, many other things, and which during COVID we had demonstrated that we could do 2.2 billion COVID vaccination. Now, the definition of digital public infrastructure and the framework of this was accepted during G20 by all the G20 countries, and therefore in the future G20 will be driven, most of the global south countries, and we have 29 countries which have accepted digital public infrastructure. That will be the way to grow. Secondly, I think the most powerful statement on women-led development was achieved during G20. That is very, very important, because India became the key voice for driving women-led development. And thirdly, I think I would like to particularly highlight the very significant contribution made by the N.K Singh report and Larry Summers' report, particularly driven by Mr. N.K Singh, on the requirement of finance and the need for bigger, bolder, and more effective multilateral institution. This was the first time that we had clear quantification of the requirement for both climate change and for SDGs. And irrespective of change of governments in different parts of the world, that quantification and the need for transformation of the multilateral institutions to cater to the needs of the global south, which is going to drive most of the growth in the coming decades, is very, very critical and very significant. And to my mind, these are very, very significant contributions of the India's G20 presidency.
Well, thank you very much. I see that there were many more speakers, but alas, we have run out of time. I take this opportunity now to profoundly thank Amitabh Kant, whose book we had discussed, made a fascinating contribution. I'm grateful to Deepak for his valuable comments, to Charan for having organized not only today's interaction, but also to have put some very keen, incisive questions to the main commentator today, and to others who have participated in this discussion. I think this book is a far-reaching one. Not one, but several such discussions are needed in the months ahead to delineate not only the past, but more importantly, what was significant today to look to the future, the power of technology, the changing geopolitical configurations, and the historic opportunity which India has in all this to be able to not only become a significant economic and a political power, and therefore a political power. I totally agree with Amitabh that countries which become economically strong also become politically more relevant. So India's continued position on the high table will depend on realizing our quest not only to become a developed economy, but to grow at the kind of rates which would be significantly faster than what we have recently grown. That's the challenge of how to grow at 8% plus in real GDP terms, which will nominal terms would therefore be about 50, looking at modest inflation. If we grow at in real terms, and if inflation remains in the band of around 12% nominal, to have the power of compounding to propel us in the direction of becoming a developed economy by 2047. So with these words, and while thank profoundly Amitabh for his valuable comments today, for his profoundly evocative and a provocative book, which deserves much wider attention in the months ahead. I bring today's discussion to a close. Thank you very much, Aaron, for this opportunity which you have given us. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, sir,
Thank
for
you.
chairing the session. I want to thank the speaker for the day, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Thank you very much for agreeing. And Deepak, at the last minute, bringing you in as a discussant and agreeing for that. I want to thank all of you. The recording of today's discussion will be on our website tomorrow. I'll share with all of you. Next week, same time, we have another topic on innovation and growth. And I'll invite you for that. Want to remind you, March 7, we have a Nobel laureate, and March 14, we have a Nobel laureate. Please pencil it. They will be speaking to us between 7 and 8 p.m. because they're speaking to us from Boston. Sir, Amitabh sir and N.K sir, I just want to mention the way both of you have emphatically said growth is the only solution. And that is the only way to sit on the round table. Otherwise, very difficult to sustain what we have gained through our effort, the Mount Everest effort. So 8 to 10% growth, of course, is true. But I had one thought and I written it in an article which I'll share with both of you. Maybe for the next 25 years, we need a ministry of Viksit Bharat, directly reporting to the Prime Minister who conceived this idea. One of the uniquest idea, no other country has planned 25 years ahead like our Prime Minister has done, and maybe a ministry totally dedicated to monitor monthly, annually, or at least semi-annually, state by state, and industry by industry growth to take us to that level. I'll be sending you the article, and I hope something concrete, the type of focus that both of you have recommended, we need to really walk it out now and not simply talk. With that, let me thank each one of you and once again N.K sir and Mr. Amitabh to be here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.